but also protecting the minorities and those what's called Israeli Jews, they will become a minority in Palestine. Actually, they were never a majority to begin with. They feel that they're a majority because half of all Palestinians are in forced exile, the others are in different cages. But to begin with, in 1948, they were only 1/3 of the population, and to this day, they're only 1/3 of the population. The population grew, but they are still only 1/3 of the population. Why do they feel they're a majority? Because they deny all the others even from living on that land.
Okay, I would like to start right away because I'm sure there will be many interesting questions and talking points. I would like to welcome everyone back and the ones who are just joining us. Welcome, and I would also like to extend a special greeting to our friends from the police. I'm sure there are some here. I hope this will be a learning experience for you, and I just have to warn you because thank you guys. And I have to warn Mr. Policeman that Ronnie is known to have Zionified, I don't know how to put it, a few people, so you have been warned. So, without further ado, I'm very happy and privileged to welcome our dear comrade Ronnie Barkan, an Israeli dissident, although I'm always a bit wary of using the word Israeli when speaking to him, and I think you will understand why in the course of his talk. Member of Anarchists Against the Wall, a boycott from within, a former member of Palestine Action, also one of the organizers of the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress this year, right, in Vienna. And I would like to go right to the point and maybe ask Ronnie to share a bit about his own path of the Zionization and activity in the Palestine Solidarity Movement, both in Palestine and elsewhere, and also about direct action in Palestine and elsewhere, and how can direct action help us raise or bring justice, or at least more justice, to Palestine. So, thank you for being here.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. First of all, sorry for not joining you on the film screening. For legal reasons, I stayed outside, but I'm happy to join you now. And I'm sure that you have many things to discuss, and we will have some time for discussion. So, my name is Ronnie. I'm an Israeli dissident, even though I don't identify as Israeli in any way. But basically what it means, being a dissident, is that I'm opposed to everything that the Zionist state is about and everything that it does since its very foundation. I am regarded as a privileged Israeli Jew, not because I consider myself Israeli or Jewish. I'm opposed to the first and couldn't care less about the second, but this is my legal status under Israeli apartheid. My legal status is being a privileged person by law, as opposed to those who are underprivileged and subjugated under the Zionist system, racial system of oppression, domination, and terror. I wanted to show you some visuals, but doesn't matter, we will skip that, but I will just say that when we talk about Palestine, also known as Israel, it's not Israel and Palestine. This is part of the issue, that people think that there are two entities called Israel and Palestine living somehow side by side with some friction. But it's not like that, it's like this. One is literally built on top of the other at the expense of the indigenous people of that land. So, when we see the whole land of Palestine, also known as Israel, we see that there were different versions of trying to cut that land into two entities or whatever, and they were all basically part of that settler colonial process that the UN was basically encouraging. In 1947, they actually decided to partition the land, giving more than half of the land to those who were only 30% of the population. Most of them were new immigrants, colonizers who came in to inherit other people's land. and they only had about 10% of the land in their possession, but they were given more than half of that land. That was a very, very unfair decision by the UN. But as unfair as it was, first of all, important to know, the partition plan of the UN was never implemented. Secondly, and I'll explain why. Secondly, even in that unfair plan, it still guaranteed the rights of those people who were supposed to be in that quote-unquote Jewish state that was about to be established. Even Lord Balfour, the known anti-Semite Lord Balfour in 1917, the Balfour Declaration, even then, when it was for very racist reasons, they decided to establish that quote-unquote Jewish state in Palestine, even then it acknowledged the rights of the people who were already living there. But acknowledging the rights of the people who are already living there goes against everything that the Zionist project is about. And that is why I'm so opposed to it. Not because the partition plan is horrible, which it is horrible and unfair, but because the very nature, the very character of that Zionist state is about not only supremacy, white racial supremacy, not only colonialism, settler colonialism, and on, ultranationalism, you name it, it's all there. But first and foremost, it's about exclusivity. It's about establishing a place for us and only for us. At the expense of all the others, especially if they are the indigenous people of that land, and that is why I'm so opposed to it. And that is why my legal status, the way that that state was established, was in order to give privilege to people of my background and put in a whole other category, the others. Okay. So that's kind of in a nutshell. So obviously, if I was born into that system, there's only two options. Either I play along, either I support that oppressive system of oppression, domination, and terror, or oppose it. Like, if I was born into slavery at the time, or not into slavery, but as a slave master, or if I was born as a white person in apartheid South Africa, there are only two options here. You either support apartheid or you're opposed to apartheid. You support slavery or you're opposed to slavery. So I'm opposed to that. And then the question is, what can I do in order to be as effective as possible, for us to be as effective as possible in order to abolish that system? Because there's no tweaking of that system. You hear these ideas of two states, blah, blah. Now there's the so quote-unquote recognition of the quote-unquote Palestinian state. So it's not a recognition, it has nothing to do with the Palestinian state, it is the state of Abbas. And that recognition is a very dangerous one, and we can talk about that in a moment. But all of these are attempts to tweak the situation rather than to fix the situation. For the masters of the land to try to somehow manipulate the system, or as Martin Luther King said in his wonderful letter from Birmingham prison, he said that for the white moderates, what he called the white moderates, what we call today liberal Zionists, he said that for them, the notion of peace is the absence of tension, not the presence of justice. So we don't want to minimize the tension, we want to bring about justice. And to bring about justice in this case means to abolish that system.
Thank you. So you have mentioned the recognition of the Palestinian state, which we are seeing in the last couple of days, a whole wave of countries recognizing the Palestinian state, whatever that means, and also a lot of two-state solution being thrown around. So I would like to, and I'm sure the audience would like to hear your view on this issue of recognizing the Palestinian state. What does it mean? What kind of a state? What are the borders of this state? What is the two-state solution or the two-state disaster, as you called it yesterday? And about the one-state solution, what is your view on this issue of this performative, I would say, act now recognizing the Palestinian state?
Yeah, so the countries that have been quote-unquote recognizing the Palestinian state recently are the West, basically. Canada, UK, Australia. The main problem, other than the US, those that are the main problem, the main actors who bring about this horrible situation that we're facing. So obviously that should tell us that this is a very alarming thing that they are doing, because they have not sided with justice in the past century. When I said that Israel is literally built on top of Palestine, what does that mean? First of all, yes, it is the exact same land. But that new Zionist race state, also known as the State of Israel, is built first and foremost, I mentioned, on exclusivity. And how can you establish an exclusive state in a place that is already inhabited? There's only two ways to go about it. You either drive away the people, or you kill them all. It's either ethnic cleansing or genocide. That's it. I don't know of any other solution. And it started from the get-go as a concerted act of ethnic cleansing. This is why the so-called partition plan of the UN was never accepted by the Zionists. It was accepted on paper, but never ever in practice, because accepting the rights of the Palestinians to stay on their land goes against everything that I just said, everything that the Zionist state is about, which is about exclusivity, driving them away as much as possible. So, indeed, the two-state solution was never implemented. The UN partition plan was never implemented. What happened instead was a concerted effort of ethnic cleansing, driving away the majority of the Palestinians from their land. And to this day, these people are not allowed to come back to Palestine. The majority of Palestinians today do not live in Palestine. They are in forced exile. And this is the first and foremost issue. This is the main issue. Then, there's also the other stuff. That there is an apartheid system that was put in place to differentiate between different classes of people, to give rights to some people and certain rights and less rights to others. And then later on, 19 years later, also came the later occupation, or what I call the minor occupation, of 1967, of the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, and also the Golan Heights. East Jerusalem is in a different category, and that's also part of that. We can talk about that. But all of these parts have been basically occupied in 1967 and have been treated in different ways. Obviously, the occupation of 1967 is horrible, it's barbaric, it's brutal. And we see what is happening in Gaza now. And we have to fight it, and we have to end it immediately. We have to end it yesterday. Every moment that we wait is too late. So obviously we have to end it. But even if we end that, we haven't solved the problem. Because the genocide that is happening today is only the latest outcome, almost the natural outcome to that system that was established in 1948. They started with ethnic cleansing, they have carried on ever since, but the problem for them is that there are still Palestinians left in Palestine. They put the Palestinians in the Nakab region, in the southern part, all concentrated in this concentration camp called the Gaza Strip, which was, if you look at the shape, you will see it was carved out. And this was a place where they drove away the people from the south, all the way from the north, from Jaffa, which 95% of the people of Jaffa became refugees. And then all the southern part of Palestine. They were driven mostly towards Gaza, and the people there have been refugees ever since. 80% of the people of the population of Gaza today are refugees, many of them from just across the fence. On the 7th of October, what I call the Gaza Ghetto Uprising, in analogy to the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, when there was the Gaza Ghetto Uprising on the 7th of October, the people who crossed the fence of that concentration camp, which has now later been transformed into an extermination camp, the people who crossed the fence, they went to their land. They were saying in Arabic, we are at the Mustawtanat, we are at the settlements. They didn't mean that we were at the settlements in the West Bank. They were at the settlements right across the fence from Gaza. These are the earlier settlements, long before the settlements of the West Bank that we hear about a lot. So, if we want to solve the problem, if we want to bring about justice, we need to solve all these issues. That half of all Palestinians, more than half, are in forced exile for one and only one reason. Because they were born into the wrong ethnicity. Because they don't belong to my ethnicity, they belong to another one. That is the reason why they cannot go back home. They and their children and grandchildren and so on. And that is why we have to solve it. And then, when we talk about the solution, obviously, any solution that doesn't incorporate all of those things that were mentioned is not a solution at all. It's just a way to perpetuate the problem. So a two-state solution is a way to basically perpetuate and even normalize and legalize what should be illegal and abnormal. And that is why the recognition of the so-called Palestinian state, or what I call the state of Abbas, the state of Mahmoud Abbas, who is Netanyahu's proxy regime in the West Bank, the state of Abbas, recognizing that is actually dangerous. Why? First of all, because we recognize that entity, the so-called Palestinian so-called authority, which has been doing nothing about promoting Palestinian rights. I can go into the long list of how they have been doing the worst things regarding Palestinian rights. So they are not really representative, and they don't represent Palestinians, and they don't really have the authority. Secondly, what is even more dangerous, other than recognizing that horrible entity, is legitimizing, because implicit in the recognition of the state of Palestine is also the recognition of the state of Israel. That criminal entity that should not even have been legalized to begin with. I mean, they should not have been admitted to the UN. According to UN rules and according to international law and so on, there is no reason why Israel is even a member of the UN. It hasn't lived up to any of its obligations. But also, especially when we talk about today, when there is an ongoing genocide, the first live-streamed genocide, when no one in the world can claim that they didn't know. In the past, in other genocides, we know that the perpetrators, they had all kinds of excuses and they said, oh, well, we didn't know, etc. No one can claim ignorance today. Everyone, every single one of us can see a live-stream genocide. Then the only question is, again, what do we do about it? And the fact that Israel is still not kicked out of the UN General Assembly, for example, as was done to apartheid South Africa at the time, already tells us everything that we need to know about the UN. Because the very first thing that needs to happen is to kick it out from the General Assembly. And the US doesn't have a veto there. It can be done tomorrow if they want it. And it should be done tomorrow. Besides, as I said, we have to be very, very careful at legitimizing and legalizing what is illegitimate and abnormal. Because the very basis of that, what's called State of Israel, is what I just said. It is based on racial supremacy and denying the rights of people based on their racial, ethnic category, and basically establishing a whole system of oppression that we see the outcome of in its most horrendous way today. So we have to oppose it for its past, we have to oppose it for its present, we have to oppose it because it's illegal, we have to oppose it because it's immoral, and also because it's not sustainable. The last part is actually a reason for optimism, because it is not sustainable. And we hear people like Ilan Pape, who is an Israeli historian, Israeli like me, is an Israeli historian who has helped to uncover a lot about the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. And he says that as a historian, he can see the end of Zionism. And this is a reason for optimism. The only problem is that until the end of Zionism, it could still get much worse before it gets better, and it could still take a long while. And this is why our actions are very important to usher in the change sooner rather than later, because we know what the UN is not doing, we know what the West is not doing, and if it does anything, it is acting in the opposite way. But the people, unlike their governments, are on the side of Palestinians. Israel has the guns, and they have the diplomatic support, and they have the political support, the money, etc. They have the guns that say, we have the people, we have the hearts. The millions and the billions are on the side of Palestine. And we see a very clear rift, for example, in the UK, like in the film that you saw earlier, where the people are so different from their government. The British government is one of the most criminal today in the world, and especially with regard to Israel, and I can talk a lot about that. But what the people are doing there is very inspiring.
Okay, on continuing on that inspiring notes, I mean, we are all constantly bombarded and witnessing this horrible. I mean, what is happening, we are living also witnessing genocide and other injustices in other parts of the world. And it is very easy, I think, to fall into helplessness and thinking that there is absolutely nothing to be done. But I think it's also important, especially in times like this, that we are living through, to try to imagine something that comes after. So I just wanted to, in this vein, ask you, how do you imagine the future Palestine beyond the two-state solution or one state or whatever?
So I still owe you an answer for the one state, right? So that's the answer, basically. I say that personally, I say that I'm in favor of less than one state, but one state is a good enough solution. But why is one state a solution rather than, say, two states? It's not about the numbers, it's about what it represents, what it means. I already talked about the two-state model, which the reason that Zionists want two states is exactly in order to perpetuate the crime. Basically, the whole idea of two states in a nutshell, the whole argument, the whole difference inside Israeli society between the so-called left and the right, or what I call the honest Zionists and the dishonest Zionists, the honest Zionists who are racist and proud of it, and the dishonest ones who are just as racist, but they are not as proud. They like to sugarcoat and to cover their racism and supremacy in all kinds of like liberal, human rights discourse, even peace and so on. So the difference between them is that the honest ones, they say we are the masters of the land, this is all ours, we can either kick out everyone, or if they stay, they will be subjugated. In the quote-unquote Jewish and democratic state, which is neither Jewish nor democratic, it is opposed to both Judaism and democratic values. But in this quote-unquote Jewish and democratic state, the honest Zionists, they say we don't care about the democratic aspect. We are quote-unquote Jewish, and when they say Jewish, because they are Zionists, they mean Zionist. They use and abuse Judaism to justify their racial supremacy. Just like the KKK uses Christianity, just like ISIS uses Islam, Zionism uses Judaism. So they say we are the masters of the land. Okay, we know where they stand. This is the acting government. You see, you can tell for yourself. The other ones, the dishonest Zionists, they want to feel that they are both Jewish and democratic, whatever that means. Now, but in order to be democratic, first and foremost, because it's an exclusive state, etc., they need to be the majority. If they are not the majority, they cannot feel that they are democratic. So they are all the time obsessed about how many of us versus how many of them are on that land. So they end up being actually even more racist than the honest racists. And the whole idea of a two-state is exactly that, to have as many Palestinians on the other side of the fence, on the other side of the border. We will even call it a state, even though it will not be a state. They come up with their conditions, that it will be demilitarized, that it will have this and that, whatever. Some autonomy, some Bantustan state that they will build, and they will call it Palestine, in order to have as many of them there and as few of them here with us. And then we can feel that we're democratic. Once we deny half of all Palestinians from even coming back to Palestine, once we put them all in cages and Bantustans and concentration camps and so on, and even those who are citizens of the state, they are second-class citizens by law, then we can feel that we are democratic. That's the idea of two states. And the idea of two states is how to perpetuate that situation forever. One state goes against everything that I just said, because when we talk about a single democratic state, some people insist on saying one secular democratic state, even. But when we have one democratic state, that means that we guarantee the rights of all the people of that land, all the stakeholders. There are 14 million Palestinians, half of which are in forced exile, plus the 7 million who are currently, 8 million, who are currently the Übermenschen, the superhumans, those who have the rights and who get to dictate everything, and they will have to renounce that privilege if they want to live as equals. And when I talk about equality, I think I told you that yesterday, that if I say that I support the Palestinian resistance, I will only be regarded as a traitor in Israel. But if I say that I support equality, full equality, that just blows their mind. that's just outside of the lexicon in Israel. It's not something that they can conceive of having equal rights between themselves and the others on that land, because, as I said, the whole nature of that state is the opposite of democratic, the opposite of equality and rights of minorities and multiculturalism and so on. So one state is exactly because it demands the same rights for all, including obviously the right of return and making sure that we do it properly, meaning that there is all the rights for the people who have suffered for so long under the boot of Zionism, reparation, repatriation, return, everything that is needed, but also protecting the minorities and those what's called Israeli Jews. They will become a minority in Palestine. Actually, they were never a majority to begin with. They feel that they're a majority because half of all Palestinians are in forced exile, the others are in different cages. But to begin with, in 1948, they were only 1/3 of the population, and to this day, they're only 1/3 of the population. The population grew, but they are still only 1/3 of the population. Why do they feel they're a majority? Because they deny all the others even from living on that land, and they deny them the same rights. That's why they feel they're a majority, but they're not. So they will have to accept that they are 1/3 of the population, and they will live as equals in a shared land with equal rights for all that protects the rights of everyone, where there will actually be a constitution. A constitution goes against everything that the state of Israel is about. Israel doesn't recognize its own borders. It doesn't recognize its own nationality. My nationality, according to the state, is not Israeli. There is no such thing as Israeli nationality in Israel. My nationality, according to the state, is Jewish. My fellow citizens have another nationality, like Circassian, or Arab, or Druze. These are the different legal categories to distinguish between the different types of population who are citizens of that state. And that's why I said that by law, I'm a privileged Israeli Jew. So they don't recognize their own borders, they don't recognize their own nationality, they don't recognize an immigration policy. It's all tailored basically on what's your ethnicity, are you with us or against us? It's all at the whim of of the government and the ministries, etc. And obviously, the one thing that can never ever exist in Israel is a constitution. Because a constitution, by definition, will have to enshrine, to protect the same rights for all the people that fall into that constitution. And that goes against everything that the Zionist state is about. And that is true. When we have one state, that means the end of Zionism. Of course, if we have equality, that means the end of Zionism. If we have anything that is even remotely democratic, that is the end of Zionism. Good. That's what we're struggling for. Zionism, at least the Zionism that was implemented in Palestine, we can also talk about the historical aspect of Zionism, which is just as bad, but the Zionism that was implemented in Palestine has no legitimacy and has to end, and this is what we're struggling for. We are struggling to abolish Zionism. You also mentioned that we actually even had, just a few months ago in Vienna, we had the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress, where all kinds of Jews around the world and many allies, mostly Palestinians and supporters from around the world, gathered in Vienna. About 1,000 people showed up for 3 days of conference, and we're already working on the second one, which will hopefully take place in Dublin next year. And it was a great success, but not just a success because many people showed up, but it was a success because people felt that it was important, that something important was happening, that something meaningful was happening, that it was not the start, but the fuel of that movement to abolish Zionism and to build a better future. And obviously it was not an exclusive conference. The name Jewish is a little misleading here, because I mentioned I don't consider myself Jewish. I'm a human being. I don't care about the rest. But the Zionist state defines me as such. The Zionist state uses that term in order to distinguish. So we, as those who are among the privileged group, those that the Zionist state claims to speak in our name, have organized this conference. And therefore it is the first Jewish anti-Zionist Congress. Okay, but it is not limited to Jews. Anyone and everyone is invited, as long as you're anti-Zionist or on the path of anti-Zionism. You're very welcome to join.
As I understood from talking to you these couple of days, the majority of the Israeli population is obviously very Zionist, but there is a long and honorable tradition of anti-Zionism within Israeli society. So maybe you can tell us something about that to encourage us a bit more.
Yes, thank you. Because when I mentioned the Congress just now, I was thinking, should I mention also, and I didn't want to make it too long, so thanks for asking. Yes, we actually, even in the opening words, we had, on the table, we had white roses and yellow daffodils. And I like this symbolism, and I hope that we will kind of create a bit of a tradition with that. And I mentioned that in the opening words of the Congress. And I said that we're not coming up with anything new, we are following the footsteps of others. And the white roses represent the white rose, the vice rose of the dissidents in Germany who were standing up to Nazism and fascism. And the yellow daffodils represent Marek Edelman and the Warsaw Ghetto uprising. And Marek Edelman, and if you don't know, please look him up. He was with the Bund, he was the deputy commander of the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, a staunch anti-Zionist with the Bund. And the Bund was a very important movement at the time, which was anti-Zionist, socialist, anti-Zionist, Jewish. And he is the deputy commander of the uprising. He survived that. He is regarded as a hero of the uprising, who barely managed to survive. He later on also became a local Polish hero, also a cardiologist that invented life-saving heart operations and so on. And obviously a political activist and an anti-Zionist. In his later years, even wrote a letter of solidarity to what he called the partisans of the Gaza ghetto. And he created this tradition of every year, Memorial Day for the uprising, he would lay yellow daffodils on the memorial in the Warsaw ghetto. And this is why the yellow daffodils are there to represent the Jewish struggle against Zionism and against Nazism. I used to say that I come from an utterly fascist state. Nowadays, unfortunately, I can say that I come from an utterly Nazi state, because this is what it is showing to the world today, the later reincarnation of Nazism and fascism. But as far as the legacy goes, the Bund is a very important movement. It no longer exists, or very little. There's elements of it. I don't want to rule it out completely. There are elements, and it is kind of, people are trying to revive it, and it would be very nice to have a revival of the Bund. But there is a history here in Europe of this Jewish, socialist, whatever, workers movement that was anti-Zionist, and they were actually much more popular than the Zionists at the time, until World War II. They were much more popular, and they obviously acknowledged that there is anti-Semitism, because there was anti-Semitism around, but they treated it as, okay, there is anti-Semitism like there are other forms of racism, and we have to treat it as such, and we have to fight racism wherever it is. And they have also joined forces with other anti-racist allies, of course. But their thinking was very, very different than the Zionists. The Zionists were saying there is anti-Semitism, and they had this reactionary response to that, saying, okay, so if we are treated differently, we must be different, we must be special, and therefore we need to leave everything and establish a place for us and only for us. And then the worst thing is that they establish it on top of other people. So they created their safe space in a land where other people were living, and made it very, very unsafe for the others. So that Zionist movement was really dangerous, actually, and rejected by the Jews who were living across Europe. Especially, we're talking about Eastern Europe at the time. Yeah, and it was rejected by them, and the Bund was actually much more appealing, because it didn't say, okay, we will never be part of this society, we can never, ever be part of the society, and we have to just go and find another place to settle. No, they said there's this racism, and we have to fight it, and we have to fight it together.
Since you mentioned the Warsaw Ghetto uprising and the Holocaust, obviously, just recently, a couple of months ago, we had a guest at the Subversive Festival, a Palestinian journalist based in Berlin, Abir Kopti, and we were talking about the situation in Germany and the crackdown on the pro-Palestinian movement. And then we were discussing about whether this repression, this really brutal repression of Palestine Solidarity Movement had anything to do with the German dealing with its own history and the Holocaust. And she said an interesting thing. She said that she thinks this is only an excuse. So this defense of the Israeli state does not have so much to do with the Holocaust. That is only an excuse. So what is your, opinion and experience being based in Germany now, I believe? What do you think about this?
So I first moved to Germany, maybe it was 8 years ago or something, and I was living for a few years in Berlin. And I went there in order to be a pain in the ass for the Zionists, and I went to the most Zionist place on earth in order to do that, on purpose. Because I know that I can say certain things that other people can't, or they're afraid to say, or whatever. And yes, and the repression in Germany is very strong. Now I'm again based in Germany, temporarily, in Munich. First of all, I can say about German society that it's the most obedient and worshipping of authority of societies that I've ever come across. And looking at German society today, I can clearly see how Nazism came into being back then. Not because it's a German phenomenon. I think that Nazism is a universal phenomenon. We see it playing out in Palestine today, but because of the type of thinking. So I will try to explain. More recently, I was about to give a talk in Nuremberg in a demonstration. I was invited to speak there, but then I was cancelled at the last minute. The organizers censored me at the very last, like a minute, like just as I was about to speak, because I was very critical of the so-called German left party, Die Linke, and I refer to them as a fascist party. But the whole kind of speech was about how Germany hasn't done even the first step of denazification. So going back to Abir's answer that this total support for Israel is an excuse, yes, it's an excuse in the sense that supporting Israel is an easy fix for Germans in order to absolve themselves, in order to look themselves in the mirror, not to look themselves in the mirror, and see the deep-rooted racism and supremacy within themselves and within German society. So psychologically, it's much easier for them to support Israel and actually support a state that is based on the same principles of differentiation between Übermensch and Untermenschen, ultranationalism, racial supremacy, and all the rest, and now genocide. I mentioned that the UK is one of the most criminal countries in the world today, and we can add Germany to that list. Germany is the second supplier of arms to Israel as we speak, also one of the leading supporters diplomatically, etc., to Israel. But I think that there is something, we have to understand that there was never an act of denazification in Germany. We can talk about how Nazism came into being, and that's an interesting discussion in itself. By the way, there's an excellent book called Defying Hitler by Sebastian Haffner. He wrote it in Berlin in the 20s and 30s. You should read it. It's really interesting about German society back then. But in any case, the thing is that after the war, there was no real recognizing, of the crime, because everyone was involved in one way or another, but they said we didn't know. But everyone was kind of involved, and these people remained in power. And in that speech that I never gave, I mentioned, for example, Hans Globke, who was one of those who wrote the Nuremberg laws, the racist Nuremberg laws, and obviously an ardent Nazi, and then later on he became the head of the Prime Minister's office after the war. And his picture is still there, like hanging. So, and this is just one of many examples. The judges, the corporations, you saw one such corporation that is active today. All these corporations that have been profiting heavily from and participating even in the genocide were still active after the war, almost all of them. When I went to smash up Elbit Systems headquarters in Bristol, UK, 3 years ago. No need to clap. I'm not here to encourage you for legal reasons. I'm not here to encourage you. I will just tell you the facts. I went to smash up the Elbit Systems headquarters in Bristol 3 years ago with other activists, and we were not wearing masks, and we were live streaming it, and we were challenging this and also challenging it in court. When I went to do that, I equate that situation to my grandmother, who was in Auschwitz. If she knew that someone was picking up a sledgehammer to go and smash up the Degesh factory that was producing Cyclone B gas that was used against my family and many, many others in Auschwitz, she would have been very happy. Many people's lives could have been saved if someone would have smashed up that factory producing Cyclone B. Elbit Systems is far, far worse, far more criminal, because they're not only producing the means of destruction, they're murder machines, they're not only testing them on the bodies of Palestinians in Gaza, and later on selling it to the rest of the world as being battle tested. They are not only producing it per IGF requests, etc. They are there on the ground with the Israeli forces. They have boots on the ground committing the genocide as we speak, and I have proof for that. So they are actively participating in that genocide. So this should tell you a lot about the level of criminality of Elbit. And I'm just saying that going back to Germany, Germany has most of these corporations and politicians and so on. They just carried on with their life. There was no real coming to terms. And this not coming to terms with their horrible history also leads them to support the current genocide, the sixth genocide that Germany is somehow involved in, and I'll name them quickly. There's Namibia, there's Cameroon, there's Tanzania, there's Armenia that they helped with, there's Auschwitz, and now there's Gaza. That's Germany.
So apart from Germany, which we also have a lot of history with, I would just want to ask, apart from this and this repression and the official discourses in many other European countries, despite this wave of recognition of the state of Palestine, I have a feeling, and we also talked about this before, that the tide is changing, or the narrative is changing somehow, I think. That Zionism is maybe even becoming a bit of a dirty word. Rising numbers of people are starting to see through this manipulation of conflating anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism. I hope I'm right that this is so, but I would like to hear what you think about it.
So, first of all, yes, I'm very, very happy to see that finally the tide is changing. Finally, there seems to be a real change. And unfortunately, it's not so much because of our efforts, which have been, we do whatever we can, but actually it's mostly, I think, because the Zionist state is showing its true face to the world in all its monstrosity. And it's all being live streamed. And at some point, people can no longer sit idly by and do nothing and think, this is normal. No, there's nothing normal about it, about seeing these atrocities. And no excuse will be good enough for that. So yes, I think that the tide is changing. I think that finally, Zionism is regarded as a dirty word, and as it should be. Like I said, we are fighting against Nazism, fascism, Zionism. This is what we are fighting against. And just as we needed to abolish the first two, still need to abolish, we need to abolish the third. Now, about Judaism and Zionism, so Zionism uses and abuses Judaism in every possible way to try and justify its unjustifiable and illegal and criminal practices. And there's different ways to dismantle that myth as if Zionism has anything to do with Judaism. So first of all, I will simply say any and all conflation between criminal supremacist Zionism and Judaism, which is a religion and nothing else. Any conflation between the two is in itself, I totally reject it, and it is in itself actually anti-Semitic and racist, etc. Because basically the Zionists try to say that, you know, all these Zionist representatives, they try to say that if you're critical of that criminal apartheid, now genocidal regime, the Zionist regime, you must also be somehow anti-Semitic, meaning anti-Jewish. And the very logic of that thinking, of that statement also says, you know, if A leads to B, then not B leads to not A. So what they're saying, if you're critical of the Zionist regime, you must also be anti-Jewish. It also means that if you are Jewish, for whatever reason, whatever that means, you must also be, because of your Jewishness, you must also be a criminal supremacist Zionist. That's a very, very racist statement to make. It's like saying all Muslims are terrorists, all Jews are Zionists. That is the most racist, most anti-Semitic thing that I can think of. So, I totally reject that. Besides, also, if you look at Zionism versus Judaism, they have absolutely nothing in common. Judaism is a religion of thousands of years. It is theocentric, it's based on God and the worshipping of God, being subservient to God. It is inclusive. People don't know that, but anyone may convert, not necessarily recommended, but it's possible. It's not recommended by me, but also religious Jews, I mean, they don't make it easy, but it's possible if you wanted to. And what makes one Jewish? The following of the commandments, the following of the 613 mitzvot, etc. Zionism is not theocentric, it is ethnocentric. It is exclusive by its very nature. What makes one Jewish according to them, no one knows. Every time that they try to define it, they fall into the trap. They are pushed against the wall. Every time they have to write it in the law, and there are certain laws in Israel that have the term Jewish in them. The very first law, the law of return, which is creating this distinction and also comes to counter the right of return of Palestinians, has the term Jewish, and you have three, actually, laws that have the term Jewish in them, and whenever they have to define it, it's a really bad thing for them because they don't consider that term Jewish as a religious element, because that would be one thing. They don't care about that. They look at it as some sort of an ethnic racial trait. And obviously, which is not Judaism, it's something completely different. And then they fall into this legalistic trap all the time. So they don't even know how to define it for themselves. And for example, what is the role of the state in Judaism? It is in order to serve the religious practice. If there is any role of the state, it is in order to serve the religious practice. What is the role of religion in the Zionist state? It is in order to serve the state. It's kind of, they flipped everything on their head. And one of the greatest thinkers in Israel, Leibovich, no longer with us, he was a religious Jew. He was a very, very well-regarded thinker, spoke about everything. And he was using this terminology. He was using very harsh terminology. He also coined the term Judeo-Nazis, for example, to describe the way that Israel was torturing Palestinians in the West Bank. Also, that Israel has actually legalized the use of torture for a few years. And he regarded the head of the Supreme Court who legalized the use of torture. He referred to him as a Judeo-Nazi. Leibovich himself fled the Nazis. He was studying in Humboldt University in Berlin. Anyway, he, as a religious Jew, he insisted on separation of state and religion, and Ben-Gurion wouldn't have it. Ben-Gurion, they had a bitter fight about that. And he used very harsh language, as you can tell, and he said that in the state of Israel, religion, the religious institution, is acting as the whore of the state, and the state is the pimp of the religion. This is kind of the type of relationship between the state and religion in Israel, according to Leibovich.
I could ask 100 more questions, but I would like also to, since Ronnie had some statements that some maybe consider a bit provocative, I would like to open the floor for the audience. I'm sure there are many questions. Yeah. Imamo li mikrofon mobilni?
First, thank you for this very insightful and great clarification of many things for our ignorance. So one of the things that we not even know that Israel does have a constitution, as you said. Mistake, I remind foolishness, I believe it basically does. But what I'm then consequently interested in, when you mentioned this anti-Zionist Congress, does it work on a constitution to propose? Does it have a constitution that would be for the day after, whatever comes? So, and if so, how does it look? What is the, just the basic, things, or can it be seen somewhere? Or?
Let's do it one by one. So, first of all, thank you for the question. Constitution is super important, and I will touch on that in a second. The Congress itself it was all recorded and live streamed, and you can watch it on stop-zionism.at for Austria. I believe that later on it will be on stop-zionism.org, because we want to have this Congress not only in Austria but in other places later on. But you will find it. All the recordings are there. There is also a declaration, you will find it right at the beginning, a declaration that we wrote as the speakers in the Congress, which basically talks about the steps or the demands in a way in order to abolish Zionism. Much of it is demands from the UN, etc. And I urge you to read it. It's also in many languages. If anyone feels like translating to Croatian, please let me know. Now, about the Constitution. First of all, it's not up to only us to write it, but I think that the act of writing a Constitution is a very, very important act. And there have been in the past, and we will also be working at present, on these kind of drafts for a Constitution. And I think that this is, again, because we're trying to sow the seeds for a better future. So, when we look at BDS, for example, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign against Israel, this deals with the immediate things that need to be done in order to end the crime. We have to stop supporting the criminals. We have to boycott, we have to sanction, etc. Because the UN, because the governments are not sanctioning, because the EU is not doing the bare minimum of following its own laws and its own agreements, like the EU-Israel Association Agreement, which obligates every member state of the EU, including Croatia, I believe, to not have business as usual with Israel. They are disregarding their own laws and regulations, disregarding international law, but because they are not doing what they are obligated to do, it's up to us, and that's why we have not only sanctions, but also divestment and boycott, which is something that every one of us can do. But all of that is more of a short-term view of how to end the crime. The long-term thing, which is possibly even more complicated, is actually building something together. All those 21 million that I mentioned before, getting together, building something together, establishing something for a better future. And writing a constitution, I think, is a very, very important act in that. I am involved in different groups. There are small groups at the moment trying to promote these kind of things, to work together on these kind of things. I hope that in the future it will become bigger and more substantial. I will say one more thing, sorry, about the constitution. Sorry, one more thing. Israel claims to have a constitution. It doesn't have a constitution. It has what they call constitutional laws, which is not a constitution, or what they call basic laws. Basic laws are laws that are very difficult to change. You need to have a supermajority. But these basic laws are all in order to protect apartheid. So I'll give you an example. Basic law, the Knesset, Article 7a, says that a party cannot run for elections and a representative cannot run for elections if they deny Israel as a quote-unquote Jewish and democratic state. Jewish and democratic can only be understood as Zionist and apartheid. If you replace Jewish with Zionist, if you replace democratic with apartheid, then it makes sense. And this was also taken to the Israeli Supreme Court, and indeed their interpretation of Jewish and democratic was exactly that. Okay, if you deny Israel as having a Jewish majority, blah, 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 then you cannot run for elections, basically. This is basic law, but it's not a constitution. So, yeah, they use the term constitution, but it's a lie. Please.
Thanks for that. I got like two short ones. Basically, in a recent interview with Dalia Sarik, who I reckon you know, she mentioned that the voices of the anti-Zionist opposition, so-called Israel, are now far few between as they were before the third intifada, let's so to say. And can you tell me more about like current voices of the opposition inside Israel, and also what radicalized you personally, and a bit of your story, because as far as I know, you were a member of Anarchist Collective also, and a bit about that, yeah.
Thanks. The view Israeli anti-Zionist or the Israeli left, which would all be anti-Zionist, which is not what you would usually hear in the media about the Israeli left, quote unquote, okay? If you're a leftist, you're necessarily anti-Zionist, okay? Like you would be anti-apartheid and all the rest, anti-colonialism. And those voices are negligible in Israel. You have the Palestinians, also those who are Palestinian citizens of the state, who most of them would be anti-Zionist. But among the privileged group that I belong to, it's such a small number of people. It's such a negligible few. I say that we all know each other by name. Okay? So it's not about quantity, it's about quality, let's say. It's not about... no, because we don't have the quantity, so, you know. So that's what we have. But this is also the reason why I left Palestine. Not because I had enough, but actually because I wanted to be more effective, and I felt that I could be more effective outside in order to change the situation inside. Just because the system is built in such a way that it is very repressive, etc., but also because the society is so utterly brainwashed and racist, supremacist, etc. They're all Zionist, basically, almost all of them. And when I describe Zionism, usually I refer to it as a cult. And I think there are many ways to describe it, but if you look at it as a cult, it kind of makes more sense. And people of that cult, first of all, it's very difficult to get out of the cult. It's a whole mental shift that you have to make. It's a whole psychological process that needs to happen. And obviously the society keeps you inside. And secondly, it's all about us and them all the time. And if you're not part of us, you're immediately part of them, which is the enemy, which is dangerous. You know, they think that the whole world is anti-Semitic and on and on and on. They believe in that because it's the whole cult mentality kind of thing. And whenever I speak Hebrew, they immediately assume that, you know, I'm part of them because that's obvious, because I'm part of the cult, until they realize that I'm not. What kind of radicalized me? I was never too much of a Zionist, I was never too nationalistic, just a little bit, but I still grew up there and I was still, you know, indoctrinated, and we are being indoctrinated from kindergarten. I like to say that I was lucky, that I was not too influenced, just a little bit. I think that one thing that protects me is that I don't give too much importance to language, to words. I kind of look at more what people are actually trying to say rather than what they're saying, if you know what I mean. Like, you know, if you listen to a politician, if you listen to Obama, you would think that he's a good guy. Okay? But if you look at that person, you realize that he's one of the worst war criminals out there. So it's kind of not falling for the language in a way, and reevaluating for myself. But still, having said all of that, for 6 years I was thinking whether I'm willing to serve in the army or not. Most Israelis don't even think whether they're willing to serve in the army. I had this process, I was thinking about it for 6 years, and we are being told that if you don't serve in the army, you're some sort of a traitor or a parasite. And I had no one to talk to about that at school or with my family or whatever. I went 3 years of high school, then 3 years of university, and I went to university in order to postpone my military service, so I have more time to think about it. And after all these 6 years, I still ended up getting drafted because I couldn't convince myself. And once I got drafted, then I had this moment, this eureka moment. So 2 months into the army, I had this realization. The first realization was to become vegetarian, by the way. Now I'm vegan, but then I was thinking about the whole thing about vegetarianism, became vegetarian, realized that I have a choice in the matter. 1 week later, I had another realization, which was, it's time to leave the army. And at that moment, the moment I had this realization, I stopped being an Israeli, I stopped being a soldier, I'm a human being, I don't care about the rest. If there is anything that I can be a traitor of is humanity. If there is anything that I have an obligation to is something that is universal. And that's it. That was easy for me. I was still in the system, so I was fighting the system trying to get out. I refused to be a soldier, they refused to release me. It took a long time, but I was not willing to be a soldier. And ever since I've been an activist, basically.
In your introduction, you said, and you made a case that basically Israel as it is cannot exist without Zionism. And my question goes, in your opinion, in what degree the Zionist state as it is self-sustainable? Can it survive international sanctions? And if yes, how to deal with it?
Great. I have much optimism exactly because I don't think it is sustainable. I think that the only reason that the Zionist state can carry on is because it gets all this support from the political, military, you name it, support that it gets from the West. South Africa, I think, was more self-dependent in a way. And still, when there was the boycott campaign against it, and eventually when the US decided not to support South Africa, that's when it collapsed, after the collapse of the Soviet bloc. But with Israel, I think it is much, much more dependent. It means that we have more, it's more susceptible to pressure. So a boycott campaign on Israel should be even more effective in a way than it was on South Africa. And it cannot do anything without the full support that it gets. It doesn't bomb in Gaza and it doesn't bomb in Iran without the okay that it gets from the US. It doesn't do anything without the, all of this diplomatic support. So in that sense, that is the only thing that I would say that this quote-unquote recognition of the state of Palestine may be a shift, maybe. I'm cautious about it because, like I mentioned earlier, it could also be that the West is really, really trying to protect Israel. That's why they're recognizing the quote-unquote state of Palestine. So we have to be cautious about that. But we are seeing a change even among European states, and that is unfortunately what the world is kind of like needs to see, kind of, because unfortunately the world doesn't care about the global South. When South Africa says something, even when Ireland says something against Israel, it's just not good enough. And by the way, Ireland says very good things against Israel, but it doesn't do anything. So it's still not good enough. Even, Irish folks, which deserve our appreciation, their government is still not doing hardly anything. But we are seeing things happening. For example, I don't know what that means. It's still too early to say, but Italy just sent a naval boat to accompany the flotilla that is making its way to Gaza. That's huge. Actually, it should be elementary. It shouldn't even be us to begin with who are taking these boats to Gaza. It should be. It's their obligation. It's the state's obligation to stop the crime of crimes, the crime of genocide. It is their obligation to supply the means for basic life, the necessary means for the people of Gaza. It is their obligation to do all of that. Obviously, it's their obligation to protect their citizens who are on these boats. And they haven't done that in the past. Maybe they're about to do that now. That is a change. That is a big change. So all of these things are reasons for optimism. And also just the global support. Because other than the politicians, there's all of us. And all of us, in most cases, are on the side of Palestine, and that is important. And look, I think that this is a call for action. I think that other than the boats going to Gaza, I would really like to organize a global march on the European Parliament by all of us. And I've been talking about that for a while, but mostly with myself. But now I'm talking about it with you. I think that it is really important that we, citizens of Europe, go on a global march in free Europe to the European Parliament and demand that they do their fucking job, basically.
I have to say that unfortunately I agree almost with everything you said. But yes, there are some difficult questions concerning the institutions that sit here, because it's maybe it goes far away how it was possible, because Zionism appeared in the 19th century, but there are some elements of this exceptionality which is considered to be the Jewish the elected people and so on. Because all the states are national states, and they have, in that way, that's why they support Israel in this behavior, because we had a similar, very bad war, not so, not in the far past. So what could you say about that? And the second question is, who is the representative of Palestinians? Why, I don't know, this discussion between Hamas and Israel? Is Hamas representing Palestinians, or just discussing with them because of the people they keep in prison? So that's
5
Okay,
minutes.
I'll make it short. First thing about the Judaism versus Zionism. So, I'm not here to defend Judaism. I'm just here to make the very clear distinction between Judaism and Zionism. Judaism in itself, like any religion, can be interpreted in different ways. Some people interpret it in a supremacist way, and then they interpret things like the chosen people in a supremacist way, that chosen people means somehow better, etc. While other Jews, those that I respect, interpret it in a totally different way. They see it as an obligation, being chosen, like handed the truth in a way, handed the scriptures, and being chosen in the sense that they have a mission, they're on a life mission of fixing the world in a way, and what's called tikkun olam, in Judaism, in Hebrew, etc. So it is not about being better than anyone, it's about being chosen in the sense of, you're on a mission, you're on a whatever, you understand what I'm saying. And the same goes with many other things about Judaism. So we can interpret things in different ways, but like I said, I'm not here to argue about Judaism, even though we can, it's another discussion in itself. The Zionists are obviously looking and taking inspiration from the most supremacist interpretation of Judaism, and they adopt it and say, this is Judaism. But this is not necessarily, this is definitely not all of Judaism. There are many religious folks who are, I am anti-Zionist because I'm a humanist. My religious Jewish friends, they are anti-Zionist because they are Jewish. Because Zionism is the greatest threat to their Judaism. Those ultra-Orthodox folks in Mea Shearim, in Jerusalem, all over the world, they are staunch anti-Zionists because they are Jewish, and I have some story to tell you about that if we have time later. And the other thing was about who's the representative of the Palestinians. I don't know. I think that the most representative thing today about the Palestinian cause and Palestinian rights is actually the BDS campaign, the Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions campaign. It is kind of a coalition of, or a collected view, in a way, that says these are the rights, these are the demands, this is the approach. Politically, there is a very strong division. We have to remember that most of the Palestinians are not even in Palestine. So even technically, it's much more difficult to organize politically because they are scattered, because they are, it's just not feasible in a way. And are Palestinian refugees in New York less Palestinian than those who are refugees in Syria, or those who are, they're all Palestinian, they all have different views, but I mean, that's why I'm saying that the BDS campaign is actually the most kind of representative thing, but definitely the Palestinian Authority is not representative. And I will just mention very quickly about the Palestinian Authority. Why do I say that? They are the ones who buried the Goldstone report. The report about the assault on Gaza in 2004. And they are the ones who did that. Then later on, when they were admitted, some status as the observatory, whatever state in the UN, they refused to sign the Rome Statute. They were actually forced into it. Hamas was actually the one who was forcing them to sign it at some point, but it doesn't matter. Like, the whole thing is that they are the ones who refused to sign it. It is, according to the Palestine papers that were published, seems like the Palestinian Authority had foreknowledge of the assault on Gaza, Kaslet, where Israel went to them a week earlier and they said, we are about to take over Gaza and we want you to, once we get rid of whatever, we want you to be in charge. So all of these things, and also they arrest their own people who dare to speak up against, etc. So I'm just saying, and there's much more to be said about security coordination and so on with Israel. Abbas himself, Mahmoud Abbas, he said several times that he is willing, if Israel gives him a good deal, he is willing to renounce the right of return of the Palestinians. Unfortunately for Abbas, the only right of return that he can renounce is his own personal right to return to Safed. But this is a personal right of each and every Palestinian, and should be regarded as such. So, I don't know, my short answer is I don't know who is the representative. Unlike the South African model where there was the ANC that was regarded as representative, we don't have the equivalent of the ANC at the moment. Maybe there will be in the future. But we have the Palestinian voices, and we have a very clear basis for Palestinian rights, which are protected by international law, protected by UN sanctioned, declarations, etc. So we have a basis to work with, even if we don't have the figure at the top. Maybe we don't need a figure at the top.
Unfortunately, we have to end. I just have a couple of finishing remarks. The first one is that tomorrow the Croatian Parliament is voting on a motion to recognize the Palestinian state, and the other one is to cut all arms deals with Israel. Before we go, I would just like to take 2 minutes to read a poem which is both sad but also offers some kind of optimism. It is by a Gazan poet, Rafat Al-Arir, who would have been my age now had he not been killed at around 6 p.m. on 6th of December 2023 at the very start of the genocide, because he refused to leave Gaza. And the title of the poem is "If I Must Die, Let It Be a Tale." If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some strings, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, waiting his dad who left in a blaze, and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying up above, and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope, let it be a tale. Thank you everyone, thank you Ronnie, good Palestine.